Okay, where the fuck was I? God, I was like in the zone. I was in the horny Hobbit zone. Welcome to You Have My Sword, and today I'm ruining Lord of the Rings for everyone by reading horny fanfic. I reached into the depths of the weird part of the net to find early internet era fanfic. So let's get horny about it. Before we begin, I want to preface to anyone listening that I have two stories, and I briefly browse them to make sure that everything in these stories were consensual. So there are no depictions of sexual assault or anything like that. The first story, we have a lot of boob stuff regarding Eowyn and Eomir, and and then the second story, we have a Hobbit threesome. Everything is consensual. Hello? Can I help you? Do you have opinions about horny Lord of the Rings fanfic? Yeah, the cat says I shouldn't be doing this episode. But we're gonna do this episode. I'm sorry, Behemoth. That's just how the world works. Yeah, anyways, so if sexual stuff is not your thing, this might not be your episode. For the most part, it's from what I've seen, mostly goofy. Like I said, I only browse because as I read this, I kind of want to read it as fresh as possible. So while I have browsed to make sure that there was nothing too salacious in these stories, most of it will be new to me as I read it to you and with you. Okay, so let's start with the first story. Oh my god. So this one takes place in Edgeworks, the summer of 3018, Third Age. It was a dark and stormy night in Edgeworks. The wind howled, the lightning flashed, and the rain pounded the roof of the Golden Hall. Oh, how I wish that someone pounded me so, came the sigh through the perfect lush pink lips, with the lower lips swollen from being sucked with unquenched desire for loving and being loved. Eowyn, Princess of Rohan, was on the prowl. Any man in his right mind would have wanted her, but none were brave enough to cross her brother Eomer. And so, year after year, Princess Eowyn remained untouched and unloved, and it was driving her to distraction. Just when she had made up her mind to run away, the steward of Gondor sent his oldest son to Rohan. Now, in the flickering light of the hall, Eowyn watched the man as a panther watches its prey, a fierce warrior who had seen his share of danger at the hands of orcs and evil men. He had no way of knowing that his greatest foe stood just at his shoulder, ready to refill his drink. What the fuck? Okay. Using all the intelligence bred into her by her distaff Númenórean lineage, which had infused her blood with the wisdom of the Eldar, she did not feel his massive horn from the front. Instead, she cunningly slinked up from his blind flank. This gave her the pretext to drape her breast over the Gondorian knight's shoulder. Okay. Feeling the warm, supple flesh, which his 30 years of warrior experience immediately identified as boob, that's in all caps by the way, Boromir felt blood escape his brain with a joyous war cry and sped towards his outlying members. Okay. The grizzled frontline warrior slowly turned his head and looked up. He expected to see hooded, lust-filled orbs of a wanton serving wench, with her breast swelling like the tidal surge at Hardond. Instead, his gray orbs met the lust-filled glaze from under the half-hooded gray eyes of a lascivious princess whose breasts, again in all caps, undulated like the rump of a mare galloping across the plains of Rohan. Boromir suddenly felt his breath leave his lungs as he stared into the face of the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Hair like spun gold, skin like white marble, lips like rose petals that promised sweet kisses, and the boobs! How could he forget those lush boobs? Again, in all caps. Just as his eyes locked with hers and the rest of the world seemed to slip away, a large hand reached out and grabbed the maiden. His first instinct was to draw his fell blade and defend her, but before he could do anything more than register surprise, he heard the words that froze his heart. "Sister, the night grows late, and I would not have you exhaust yourself waiting upon a table of drunken men. Come, take your leave of the king, and I will walk you to your chambers." The loss of contact with the ethereal phenomena made a feral warg-like howl rise in his throat. I don't know what that sentence was. I feel like I said it completely incorrectly. Feeling her move away made him feel pain as acute as that he felt when, left for dead, he had attracted the attentions and ministrations of a Mordor Uruk cock. Hang on a second, I'm going to read that again. Just to make sure I read this correctly, and this is the direction we're going. Feeling her move away made him feel pain as acute as that he felt when, left for dead, he had attracted the attentions and ministrations of a Mordor Uruk's cock. He immediately stifled that howl. Same as then. But unlike that time when he lay beneath the Uruk, whose stench was stronger than the troll groin Baragons from Third Koi, he could not find his release in biting the brother's nose off. Drawing upon his courtier's training, he suavely waved his horn at the delightful female and ejaculated. "Need? ? What the fuck am I reading? Okay, so it seemed, let's just take a break and kind of break down what we've just read. So, yeah, okay, so he's horny for Eowyn. That's great. I love that. But also, it seems that he is fucking orcs on the battlefield. And I don't think, when it says ejaculated, I think the writer meant, like, he exclaimed. I don't think he actually physically ejaculated quite yet. Okay. Eomer narrowed his eyes as he looked at the Gondorian, smiling and holding his horn out towards his sister. Something about the man triggered a primal rage deep within him, and he had to hold back a sudden desire to growl and rip his throat out. No one dared look upon his sweet sister with such open longing, at least none that did not want to meet a swift and painful death. Apparently, this steward's son did not know of whom he was dealing with. What? Okay, Eomer is like a cock block, dude. What the fuck? I am sorry, Lord Boromir, but I must deprive you of my sister's company. She is still too young to keep such late hours, and I would have her in the safe confines of her bower. If you will excuse us, I will take her there now. When I return, perhaps you can finish entertaining me with your tales of battle. Come, sister. And with that, Eomer wrapped a protective arm around Eowyn's waist and half-dragged her from the table. All the while, the princess never took her eyes off Boromir's, promising much with her gaze and asking for more. He knew with a certainty he had never felt before that he would have this maiden for his own. In every way that a man could have a woman, she would be his. Sir? Are you quite done? No? You hate this. You hate that I'm doing this. Let's see, where were we? It was physical pain for Boromir to watch them walk away. His only consolation was the sight of the princess' hips swaying with the rhythm of the thrust and parry which passed between a man and a woman when they joined, a rhythm ancient as Arda herself. Behemoth, I am trying to record a podcast. He just knocked my cup of coffee onto the floor. Where the fuck was I? That was actually a pretty good line. Let's read that again. His only consolation was the sight of the princess's hips swaying with the rhythm of the thrust and parry which passed between a man and a woman when they joined, a rhythm ancient as Arda herself. I actually quite like that. He now forced himself to put his brain to work. He manfully ignored the excruciating pain of his gorged to the borders of reason manhood. The acute discomfort was compounded by the head doing a peekaboo act from underneath the protective shield of the foreskin and chafing against his breeches. As supreme strategist of Gondor, after Da, of course, he had come up He had to come up with a plan. Every time I read the word calm, I panic. I'm sorry. Let's read that again. As supreme strategist of Gondor, after duh, of course, he had to come up with a plan. A plan, yes. Just a fortnight before they had a map exercise, case open folds, the invasion of Rohan. He was to lead a raid and murder the dwellers of the Medusaled in their beds, so he had memorized the floor plan. He knew where those certain folds. He smacked his lips. Would be tonight. As she and her brother walked the darkened halls of Medusaled, Eowyn's heart pounded as she remembered their guest's broad shoulders, strong arms, and wicked eyes. Just as a blush rose to her cheeks, her brother's voice interrupted her thoughts. Sister, it did not escape my attention the way Lord Boromir looked at you, in the way you looked at him. I suggest you put any thoughts of him out of your pretty little head, because I will not have it. Do you hear me? This is no man worthy of your attention, much less your love. You will remain here with me and our uncle under our protection. Do you understand me? Yes, brother, of course I do, said Lady Eowyn as her brother's grip tightened around her arm. For a moment he stared at her in a way that almost frightened her, but before she could say anything more, he suddenly jerked her away from the door to her chambers. Come, sister. Tonight I will have you sleep in my bed, where I can rest assured you will be safe. Your ladies will attend you and watch over you until I return. In the meantime, okay, wow. What the fuck? Okay, that scared me for a second. Your ladies will attend you and watch over you until I return. In the meantime, I will leave Eofian and Hama outside the door to stand guard. Get some rest, dearest one. The cat is certainly on one today. I am so sorry. This is important stuff. Okay, get some rest, dearest. And with that, Eomer stooped to kiss her cheek and push her through the door to his rooms. Eowyn was shocked but could think on the hoof, as befitted a daughter of the mark. She swirled like a she-cat to face her brother and exclaimed, "Oh, brother mine, but I have to go to my room." "And why is that, oh, sister mine?" He gazed upon her with his steely gaze of hazel eyes, which gave maidens wobbly knees and his loyal steed, Firefoot, an erection.
You've got mail.
What? Why, brother mine, I am having my girly days. Surely you do not wish for me to bleed my clots all over your linens. Okay, this was quite clearly written by a man. And pressed her body against his, her crotch against his thigh. Let you know that my flow is heavy, flowing like the snowborn, gushing with the runoff of melting snows, with clots like boulders rolling down the Thelweg. I don't know what that is. But I do know that this was written by a man, 3,000%. It feels like this writing assignment was like, hey, are you a man? Describe what you think a period's like. Okay, anyways. Eowyn could only watch in shock and a growing sense of fear as her brother seemed to have some kind of fit outside the door to his chambers. She had no way of knowing that, in telling her brother of her womanly courses, she had, in effect, waved a red flag in front of his very eyes. A big red flag. Unbeknownst to a sweet maid like Eowyn, there were certain men, very manly men, her brother being one of them, who became horribly repulsed at the thought of such an innocent event. Oh my god, this is like most men though. Right, ladies? If there's any ladies listening, it is insane how men react to periods. This is how I picture every man reacting to a period. It's like, it's so dramatic. Okay. He swooned from the ground zero impact of this psychological attack, and it awoke a memory long ago pushed to some dark depths of his mind. When a lad of but 16 summers, he had lifted the kilt of an orc warrior, curious about the blood streaks on its thighs. The only visible damage the corpse carried was the loss of head. So why the blood there? What he had seen and smelt there haunted him to this day. Oh my god! Men, it's okay! I promise. It's not that weird. He jumped away from his sister, imagining that through her skirts he felt warm dampness and, with feline grace, made a half-turn in flight, spewing his ale 7 feet down the corridor. Turning back towards her, with a feral gleam in his eye, Eomer grabbed his sister and nearly lifted her from her feet. On the contrary, my sister, the idea of you in such delicate a condition only hardens my resolve to keep you safe. You are an innocent virgin and have no way of knowing such things, but men like Lord Boromir would see your feminine blood as a means to ease their taking of you. Men like that are little more than fiends. No doubt he has smelled it on you, and that is what drives his animal lust for you. I demand that you stay with me under my protection until such time as he leaves or you stop bleeding. Only then will your precious maidenhead be safe from that rutting boar of Gondor." Hearing such delightful, disgusting insights into male minds, Eowyn decided to play the swooning maid card. She telegraphed the whites of her eyes to Eomer and crumpled like a Kleenex to the floor. Okay, so here's the thing, guys. This is where I ended this one. So I kind of feel like I was bait and switched with this story. Because when I first started reading it, like I said, I was just lightly scanning to make sure everything was consensual. And I just saw a lot of the word boob in caps. And I was like, oh, this is going to be sick. We love a boob story. And then it just turned out into a weird period story, I guess. And so I only copied and pasted about 2 pages worth of this fanfic because I was like, oh, that'll be enough because I'm going to do a second story. So I'm sorry. That should have been way hornier than it turned out to be. This just turned out to be a story about how men are pussies when it comes to periods. But the good news is we have a Hobbit threesome next. So we can jump right into that one. Give me a second to collect myself. Make sure the fucking cat's okay. I'm gonna drink some coffee, then we'll get into a Hobbit threesome. Okay. Okay, this one I did read a little more thoroughly. I promise there's gonna be, well, I can't promise, honestly, that there's not gonna be any twists and turns in this one. So I just kind of browsed until I found like the meat of the situation, if you will, and just kind of grabbed that and pasted it into my document. Because there was a lot of like build up to this Hobbit threesome, and I just wanted to jump right into it with you guys, obviously. Sam felt his heart racing. He had a feeling he knew what was coming, but he felt so worried. This was completely new for him. He had no experience at all. But Rosie and Frodo both headed for the door to the 3rd bedroom, and he had little choice but to follow. "Are you sure, Rosie?" he asked quietly. She scoffed. "I most certainly am, Samwise. I've wanted this for years. Well, the sex for only a couple, but your love. And Frodo, I admit, also always captured my imagination." Frodo laughed. "Well, thank you, Mistress Rose. Shall we?" he asked, pointing to the door. Sam gulped and nodded. Rose eagerly nodded and literally sprang inside. She literally sprang inside. She's a little spring baby. Frodo followed her, and Sam came last. The room was small, with a single medium-sized bed, a fireplace, and a small table and chair set, which had been left for Lobelia. Frodo went over to the bed and smoothed out the covers. "Well, I do believe that Rose should have the choice of how this goes, as it was her idea to begin with." She smiled. "Well, that's easy." She grabbed Sam and kissed him hard, pulling him backwards, and fell over onto the bed. Sam was surprised, but he reacted swifter this time. He returned the kiss and quickly moved down to her neck. Without being conscious of it, his hand moved up and groped her breast as he kissed her, bringing grasps of pleasure from her. After about 3 minutes, he stopped and let her stand. She looked purely excited. "Turn your backs, boys," she said seductively. Sam and Frodo glanced at one another, but turned their backs obediently. They heard rustling clothing behind them, but fought the urge to turn. About 30 seconds later, Rosie spoke. "All right, you can look," she said, and they turned. She was naked, except for a lacy green bra. Sam was surprised. Most hobbits didn't wear undergarments, but he realized that she probably had come here with this very purpose in mind. Sam stared at her hungrily. She was beautiful. Her straw-colored hair rippled down her front, curling just above her bra, covering the full view. He couldn't believe this was actually happening. Frodo felt something harden in his nether regions. That's your dick, my dude. As he admired the beautiful hobbit, who stood nude in his bedroom. She was perfect. He felt impatient to get out of his pants. I'm sorry I'm reading this so poorly, but I truly can't believe that I am actually sitting down to do this, and I have hit a record button to do so. Rosie had no issue exhibiting herself. She loved their gazes. It was true. This would be her first experience, but she knew enough about it to know that she liked their eyes on her body. Shall we? She inquired suggestively. Sam and Frodo both stepped forward, eyes bright and pants bulging. Yes, they said in unison, making Rosie laugh. One at a time, boys, she exclaimed. I'm new to this, you know. Sam privately admitted the same. Frodo, on the other hand, shamefully remembered the girl from Stock, the one with a bow in her hair, who had followed him home and asked him for a favor. He didn't like to think about that. Oh my god, Frodo, what the fuck, dude? Okay. I would like to read that fanfic. Rosie looked them up and down. I'll take Sam first, she decided. Mr. Baggins, if you could sit down. Thank you. I'll come back to you in a second. Come back, she added with a sly grin. Sam stepped forward hesitantly, and she gave him a seductive smile, before stepping forward for a kiss. The kiss deepened, and their tongues both came out, searching for something. They stood like that for a full minute, before Rosie pulled back, gasping for breath. But she recovered quickly. She put a hand on Sam's chest, and directed him back towards the bed. He stood beside it, staring at her, and her hands worked on his shirt, undoing the tied fabric of his jerkin. A small smile played on her lips as she did so, while Sam just watched her face. By the way, this doesn't sound like how kissing should work. I'm not like a doctor, a kiss doctor or anything, but that does not sound like that's how that should go. But I don't know how hobbits do it. His shirt fell to the ground, leaving him bare-chested. She grinned and put a hand on his chest, feeling his rather non-existent muscles. What a fucking burn. But she leaned down suddenly and began working with the strings of his trousers. Sam looked across to Frodo, who watched hungrily, a look of impatience clearly on his face. Suddenly his pants fell to the ground and his penis hung out, hitting Rosie on the face. She just laughed and grabbed it, twirling it in her fingers like a switchblade? What? Well, tell me how it feels, she said. Sam just groaned as pleasure rippled through him. Wonderful, he said quietly. She let go and rose up, kissing him again. They locked together, lips moving in sync. Sam, without quite realizing what he was doing, reached down her back and undid the knot that held her bra up. He literally felt her smile in the kiss. At least her lips changed their movements, so she was clearly aware of it. He let the bra drop and it caught on his cock as it fell. Interesting that you start with the word penis, which feels very clinical to me, and then we move to like the word cock, which is much more sexual, right? I've never had sex before. This is all new to me. He pulled back from the kiss, looking anxiously at her. He hoped he hadn't annoyed her by removing it, but when he saw her breasts, he didn't care about that. They were perfect, big but not too busty, and without a blemish at all. He reached out and cupped them in his hand. He bounced them up and down, extracting a laugh from Rosie. He wasn't sure if she would be all right with it, but he lowered his mouth and took one on his tongue. He laughed at it, twirling his tongue around the nipple, making her groan in pleasure and buck slightly. Hi. Yes, she murmured faintly and passionately. Sam switched breasts, and she groaned even more this time. Oh, yes, that's perfect. Oh, great gore-hended old buck, she exclaimed. Sam pulled back his head and kissed her on the mouth again, catching her by surprise. She seemed rather inflamed with pleasure, and she groaned in bliss as his tongue explored her mouth. After 30 seconds, she pulled back. That's enough playing, she said quietly, a gleam in her eye. Lay down, she commanded. Sam's eyes lit up as he sat down on the bed and adjusted into a laying position. Rosie, in all her glory, smiled at him for a moment before kneeling down on the edge of the bed and scooching over towards him. She kneeled above him for a moment before lifting her leg and planting herself on his stomach. Sam felt the beautiful friction occurring between the two of them. He shifted, trying to feel it to a greater extent, before she leaned forward, planting herself, laying down on top of him. Her tits... Oh, now we're going with tits. I love that. Her tits pressed against his chest. She smiled at him and kissed him one more time before sitting up again and pulling her hair back. We know what that means, right? She looked over her shoulder, down at his cock, and sighed, it'll have to do. She moved down a bit, settling his cock right against her ass. Wait, what? She glanced back at him. Are you ready for this? She asked. Sam nodded without a word, unable to speak. Rosie rode the friction for a moment, groaning in pleasure, before sitting back and placing herself directly on top of his erection, before she sat down around him. Did she, like, roast his dick, too? Like, was she, like, not impressed? That's such a bummer. I hate that. She could have, like, not voiced that to him in the moment, but go off, Rosie, you queen. It was bliss for both of them. Sam grabbed her waist and held her there, while Rosie leaned forward and put her hands on his chest. She bit her lip hard, and blood trickled down it. She pushed up once more before sitting down again. This time, her hymen broke? What? And she screamed out in a mix of pain, pleasure, and passion. Sam groaned under her and reached around to grasp her hips. Oh my, she gasped as she slowly began to ride him. Her movements began slowly as she got used to the heat and pleasure, which was painful in a way, but soon she began speeding it up, and was soon riding like a pro. Oh my god, she's on X Games mode with this shit. Sam gasped and savored the moment. He felt himself close to coming, but he forced it back and continued the glorious sex. The glorious sex. But a few minutes later, he couldn't fight it any longer. Rose, he murmured, I can't help it. ... She smiled at him, clearly understanding. She removed herself from the situation by lifting her leg and swiveling sideways. She grabbed his cock with her fingers and began circling it, making suggestive motions, and eventually putting her tongue to it. A few seconds later, Sam came, squirting onto her face, resulting in a gasp of appreciation from Rose, who wiped her face with a hand before licking it clean. Wonderful, Sam, she said quietly, her voice filled with passion. I think you're spent, though. Sam had to agree. He felt worn out, and he didn't know if he could go another round. Rosie solved the problem. I just want to circle back to that hymen moment. I just feel like, obviously a man wrote this one too. But men are like weirdly obsessed with like virgins and hymens, and just adding that in also felt weirdly clinical. I think there's like more romantic ways to describe like taking someone's virginity or losing your virginity together with somebody. This felt a little clinical and jarring. But I digress. Frodo, your turn, she said softly, pointing her ass cat-like in his direction. He rose instantly and hurried over to the bed. Sam got up and exchanged places, sitting naked in the chair Frodo had left. Oh my god, poor Sam. I don't know why, but I feel bad for Sam in this situation. Rose pulled Frodo down on top of her, and he latched onto her breasts. He lapped at them, twirling his tongue around her hardened tits, making her throw her head back and buck slightly. Oh yes, she moaned. I just feel like also whoever wrote this may not have experienced sex themselves, but that's just an assumption on my end based on hardened tits. Frodo took it in his teeth and bit down slightly, extracting a scream of pleasure from Rose. He wound his tongue around it for a few seconds before pulling back. He grabbed Rosie around the waist and pulled her forward and onto her back, placing himself directly in position to take her. She gasped in surprise at his daring, but when he plunged into her, she screamed in passion. Yes, yes, oh great bull roarer took. Huh. So clearly Frodo is more experienced here. He just like fucking entered the chat in a big way. Okay. Frodo ground his teeth against the bliss and began thrusting harder and harder so that she was grasping the blanket. Frodo still held her waist as she plunged deeper into her. He felt himself welling up inside and quickly pulled out. He didn't want to become a father while walking in distant lands. What, dude? But he ejaculated the moment he pulled himself out, splattering her stomach. She laughed and rolled over onto her stomach, which unfortunately covered the blanket with his juice. He flopped down next to Rose and looked at her. She smiled and kissed him. Sam flopped down on the other side, and she rolled over on top of him, pressing her breasts against his chest. Sam kissed her passionately before moving his lips down to her neck. She groaned and pulled him even closer. He bit it in places with his teeth and kissed it tenderly in others. Eventually she pulled back and planted another kiss on her lips. Oh, eventually he pulled back. Yo, this is mad confusing. There's just too much going on. She sighed in pleasure and rolled off him, landing on her back between the two males. which again is so weird. 2 males? Like, there's a lot of very clinical language peppered in here. It's like jarring. She looked at each of them in turn. Well, that was wonderful. Thank you too. Sam and Frodo just grinned at each other. I think I'm ready to cross Middle-earth, Mr. Frodo, said Sam breathlessly. I think I am too, replied Frodo. Oh, was this threesome supposed to take place, like before they went on their, like, fellowship journey for the War of the Ring, I'm guessing? That's interesting. Rosie glanced back and forth between the two of them. Well, I suppose I'll give you one last parting gift. God, it's... okay. There's more. I thought we were done, but there's more. She rolled on top of Frodo and sat up on his stomach. She edged up until she sat on his chest. Frodo's eyes gleamed. She scooted even further up, sitting above his neck. Take me with your tongue, Mr. Baggins, she said quietly and edged up onto his face. He grunted in surprise, but Rose quickly felt his tongue caress her from below, so he evidently obeyed. Sam rolled over, looking in amazement at the face-sitting act currently being displayed. She noticed him. You're next, she mouthed, and he nodded absently. Sam laid down next to Frodo, ready for whenever she wished to switch. It came quickly. Soon she lifted one leg and swung it across, landing on Sam's neck. She pushed back and pressed her ass into his face. His tongue shot out, and he licked her for all he was worth. She groaned in pleasure and began slowly bouncing. It did hurt Sam, but only in a good way. He felt her grasp his penis, and she slowly masturbated him. In only a matter of minutes, he felt himself growing close to coming, and she evidently could sense it too, for she tugged harder, and he felt himself come, his juices cascading down over her hand, accompanied by a sigh of contentment from Rose. But in that moment, Sam felt a sadness welling inside him. He could get used to this, but they were to depart soon for Buckland, and then Rivendell beyond. He forced himself to savor this one moment, as it would likely be the last of his kind, with Rose, at least. He licked her harder, making her cry out in pleasure. This is the life, he thought. Okay, well, that is the end, finally. That, I feel like I was reading that for 100 years. Bro, what? All right. And I think that very well concludes this episode. If this upset you, why'd you make it all the way to the end of the episode then? Feel free to blame me, but also my producer Rachel for planting this seed in my head. As always, you can head over to youhavemyswordpodcast.com for links to our socials and Patreon and Discord, and you can find me now over on twitch.tv under Krysti Pryde if that's your thing. If you have any ideas for episodes, be it topic or content, or if you simply have a question you'd like answered in an episode, write to me using the contact form over at youhavemyswordpodcast.com. And with that, I'm gonna go take a cold shower and probably jump on Twitch. Thanks for listening, and as always, you have my sword, which has taken on another meaning from this episode. Goodbye.
Edgeworks Nebula.